The work done by the thousands of North Dakota oil and natural gas workers is working to improve energy independence and national security, working to make America more competitive around the world, and working to provide a better today and tomorrow for everyone in North Dakota and across our country. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas works for our future. North Dakota Petroleum Foundation, advancing the possibilities.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. As we have relaunched the show. We've gotten back into the groove of doing the show after the holidays, and of course, just in time for the legislature to be kicking off in Bismarck. So much stuff going on, so many bills getting dropped, and of course, we're going to go through that Sturm und Drang during the beginning of the session, where there's a lot of wild bills that get filed, and people get worked up about them, and then they don't last that long, and they die. Some of them last though, and you never know. That's kind of the problem. You don't know what's going to make it, what's not. So we're in that portion of it, but one very consequential thing that happened right at the beginning of the session. And by the way, we're going to talk about this, and then later in the show, we're going to have on Dean Mitchell from DFM Research about a poll from Chad's group, North Dakota United, about sort of informing where the public's at on some pretty serious questions that the legislature is going to be considering. But yesterday, the Legislative Audit and Fiscal Review Committee, lovingly known as the LAFRC Committee, which reviews audits, as you might imagine, among other duties. They reviewed an audit into Auditor Josh Gallion's office, or a review. I'm not an auditor. I don't know all the terminology. It was a performance review. I don't know. They were going through vocabulary words during the committee hearing yesterday, and there's specific terms of art, but you people know what I'm talking about. I think you'll remember back in the 2023 session, there was some controversy and at times maybe some tough feelings between Auditor Gallion and the legislature, which was sort of what this review was born of. The review had some findings in the area of communication, in the area of invoices, but the overall, no red flags. And I would argue, and maybe because Josh Gallion is joining us now, he's our guest. And Josh, I guess that would be my first question to you is, when I sat through that hearing, I thought, well, this is the process working. The legislature had some criticism. You would probably say maybe some of it went too far, was invalid, but they had some criticisms that resulted in action from your office. This review found that your office responded to that criticism and has implemented some new guidelines, and things have improved. That seems to me like the process working. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate the feedback that we received last legislative session. You aren't incorrect. Yes, there was probably some additional emotion that went into some of that, but we really took a lot of that feedback from the legislature to heart. The time period that we look at, that really this review occurred under, the 2020 to 2023, we were able to have the performance review team, the contractors, extend that to look into 2024 to really get a sense of some of the issues that we knew about, that we uncovered, and the corrective actions that we took, and the review encompassed all of that. I would just point out that, we all face an unprecedented challenge in that time period. The COVID pandemic that hit. Auditing here in the state of North Dakota, we have so many good people out there, but so many of our processes are still paper processes. They're not digital. We're a very rural state. So when you throw a wrench into our auditing process, where now we're not supposed to go on site, we can't really look at things. It created a whole new set of challenges in us getting our work done. That team is special funded, meaning they have to work to generate revenue to cover their costs. And so that pressure, on top of These local government clients now, from the federal response to COVID, started distributing. I mean, it was trillions of dollars across our nation, and many billions of that wound up right here in North Dakota. That went down to the local level. So now we had where previously to 2020 and before, about 10% of our clients needed single audits. That's the federal audit. That's a requirement. If you expend more than $750,000, the federal government requires a single audit. Since 2021 and forward, we've seen a 300% increase in our workload with our clients conducting those additional audits. So before, it was business as usual. We did a lot of business on a handshake because those audits and our clients, it was very routine. We'd help them with the non-audit services. We'd conduct the audit. Come 2021, 2022, 2023, our processes were clearly not as resilient. The additional pressures, there was probably a lack of understanding. We definitely needed to improve the communications and the detail and the training. So that's the feedback that we really appreciated last session. And we have fixed a lot of that, but that increase in workload, the clients didn't necessarily understand. So when they would get an additional audit requirement from us, because when we go into our client, when we're conducting these audits, we want to make sure that they are complying with all of the regulations, all of the rules, all of the laws. So we would just kind of start doing these single audits. They may not have completely understood that this was a requirement of spending those dollars. Those single audits take at a minimum 40 plus hours to conduct. So some of the challenges that we realized, the normal audit services that we were doing, which were challenging to get done, also had the additional audit requirement step on top of it. So if you were expecting an audit bill of $10,000 and all of a sudden the bill came out $15,000, $16,000, that's some of the frustrations. And so those are a lot of things that we've addressed. This audit that was conducted, they came in and reviewed all of that. We've implemented cost proposal processes, much more detailed billing to kind of break out so people could see the different types of work that we're doing with hours and rates. And so we now have a much more resilient process. I mean, during COVID, I would say, it felt like we were drowning. We were just trying to struggle to keep up. In addition to all of those, we all faced unprecedented workforce challenges. We had private sector firms withdrawing from providing these services. And so, it was a kind of a perfect storm for us. We were doing the best we could. And we knew that there were issues that we had to address. And so we're grateful that we've been able to correct those, move forward. The outcome of this report, it's great to have that verification that the changes that we identified, we implemented, they could see, they tested, they verified everything. Today it's looking much better. We are in a much better position today in educating our clients, having them have a better understanding of the work that we're doing before we get to that invoicing part at the end.
So Auditor Gallion, first of all, thanks for coming on today. And I'll be honest, I didn't watch the LAFRC hearing yesterday. That continues a whole lifetime of not watching LAFRC committee meeting. But I did read.
You're missing out.
But I did read the report, and I couldn't help but think about that. If I were you, I'd be a little bit feel pretty good, validated with the work that your office is doing. But one of the questions I have is, you said you appreciated the feedback last session and it allowed you to make some changes. Would you have made those changes if the legislature hadn't allocated a bunch of money to do this audit? And was spending a bunch of money by the legislature necessary if you were going to do this stuff anyway? So I guess my question as a taxpayer is, if you were doing all this stuff, why did we have to spend all this taxpayer money to look at you doing your job rather than you just coming back in January of 2025 and saying, hey, listen, here's the problems you identified. Here are the things we've done differently. Like, why did we have to spend money for you to prove you're doing your job?
That's a great question. To me, what we looked at when we started getting this feedback, those changes were being put into place immediately. Some of these changes, we had to revisit some of our processes and our procedures. When we provided a more detailed billing, it's a manual process for us. Our electronic work paper software doesn't integrate with the state's financial system. So we would manually enter the details that we had from the audit, and we would enter that into the invoice. Now we manually enter more information. If that's what people want, those changes were being implemented before last session even ended. The ideas that came out and all of this feedback, we jumped into action. Now, your question as a taxpayer, could this have been done without the audit? From my position, yes, I believe in my team. We have great people. We were going to do this regardless of an audit or not. We could have presented all of this information this session and what we've been doing. But when you look at it from the legislator's perspective, and again, I don't want to speak for the legislature. I'm just trying to put myself into their shoes. They wanted assurance. They wanted verification. And, as an auditor, that's what we do. We go in and we verify that things that are supposed to be done are actually happening. And so is there value in an audit? Every audit has value. The legislature wanted that verification, that validation that the changes we're making were actually going to address the concerns that they were hearing from their constituents. Now, a lot of those concerns, I wish those constituents would have called us with that feedback, and shared some of those concerns, and we would have happily addressed those. If people want information from the auditor's office, we can give it to you in wheelbarrows. I mean, there's no shortage of information that we have. We're always trying to find that balance between education and informing without overburdening with some of the data and information that we have. So, again, at the end of the day, I'm very grateful for the work that the auditors did, the contractors. I'm very grateful for the feedback that we received from the legislature. And I'm extremely happy with the work that my team here has done to make sure that these changes to improve our processes, to make us more resilient, more capable to be informative in education for our clients, that everything has happened the way it is supposed to happen.
I guess I would add, because I reported on this and I talked to a lot of entities that Josh audited, and I would say that the audit in part wasn't just for the legislature, it was for them as well, because they expressed some dissatisfaction with the process. And so, satisfying that and hopefully, getting back to a place where we can just get back to normal business, it's a process. And some of that involves, bringing somebody in independently to look at this. I'm glad we did this audit. I'm glad it happened. I'm glad there's been improvement. Although one thing, the audit was a little dry. One of the things flagged were communication issues, but they didn't really get into specifically what. I mean, I think some of it was like communication over invoices and making sure that people understood, why certain costs were what they were and itemization. I think that was certainly part of it. But one big complaint, that, for instance, the Gwinner Rural Fire Department, they felt like you went to the news media and exaggerated some of their findings or sort of glorify whatever words you want to use. And I don't know if that fell under the communication category, but that was a very, I mean, that to me, I thought it was a fair criticism. And I'm just wondering about that. Have you thought a little bit more about how you communicate about these audits and the findings?
We have, Robin, and you're in the communication business. Communication is something that we need to be very persistent on. There's always things that we can do better. When we look at this report, that's definitely something even to this day that we're continually fine-tuning, enhancing, and trying to improve to make sure that we spend more time up front communicating and educating with our clients so that when we get to the back end, we don't have a lot of the questions and confusions that we had during this period. And again, when we're doing work that people didn't understand or they didn't expect, and when they got bills that they didn't think that they were going to get for that work, again, today we recognize all of that. Everything within this report, we self-identified to the contractors. We gave them all of this. These are all things that post-pandemic, when we started evaluating some of our internal procedures based on a lot of the feedback that we've got, yes, communication is definitely key. And it's, again, something that we're going to continue working on. And you look at the report itself, there are things within here when you look at the survey and how they presented things. We tried to work with the contractors a little bit to maybe change how some of that was presented, because when you start throwing in the other category, there were so many, it was really too positive. It really kind of skewed the way some of that information was presented, because when somebody marked other, I think they were saying it was not applicable.
Yeah, and let me set this up a little bit for the listeners. In the audit report, there were some pie graphs where they did a survey, and then there were some pie graphs with the responses. And some of the pie graphs were dominated by the other category. And I mean, you heard lawmakers. I was, when I read it, I was like, what is other? What is that? What is that? Because it was like satisfied, not satisfied, and then like other. And so like lawmakers were asking, and I guess it was because some of the questions didn't apply to some of the respondents, and so they were put in the other category, but also maybe other could mean other things. So the contractor didn't execute maybe on that aspect as well as they could have.
The survey was confusing. I would also point out that 56% of the people didn't respond, which a lot of times when you don't respond to a survey, everything you're fine with everything. And so what we're looking at is the 44% that did. And some of the survey questions were directed at and they had a wide group of stakeholders that they sent it to. And many of the questions weren't applicable. That's where the other came from. And so, yes, when we talk to them, we're like, well, why don't you just remove the other? You can mark it, but take it out of the presentation to show a better reflection of maybe what people thought. And even there, when you look at that, I mean, we do have some positives. There are some areas that we're going to continue working on. But again, overall, I think, we had some challenges. We had some difficulties. The team here at the auditor's office has been working relentlessly to try to correct some of these. And we're very appreciative that, that we could make some of these corrections. We believe in continuous improvement. And that's how we're approaching this. And we're going to continue moving forward. Anytime somebody has suggestions or input, we welcome all of that because, again, we want to make sure that we're producing value-added services for our clients and all stakeholders, which include the legislature, which include the citizens, which include the media, which is a vital part of educating and informing everyone across our state.
Josh, fair or otherwise, there's been the perception in the last few sessions that you've had lots of conflict with the legislature. And I think some of that maybe get overblown. But do you think this audit now allows your office in your relationship with the legislature to move forward in a way that sort of puts some of those conflicts in the back so you can focus on doing your job and the work that the folks in your office are doing?
Definitely. I think hopefully this will put a little bit of some of the emotions that have maybe run high in the past, on both ends. Let's let some of this stuff subside. I think it's a misperception that we've had a lot of conflict with the legislature. We've actually had some very valuable pieces of legislation go through that have really had huge impacts on local governments. I mean, some of the changes that we've made to the threshold have reduced an immense financial burden on some of these smaller governments. And so those are some of the successes that we've had in the past.
That's the threshold. That's the threshold at which a requirement for an audit kicks in.
So at $2 million, that's when an entity needs a full audit. That used to be much, much lower. It used to be around $300,000. And then we moved it to $750,000 and we realized it just didn't quite do enough. And we bumped it up to $2 million. And so we've had many of these successes. We've been able to work with the legislature on many of these things. So I think that, some of this, yes, it gets probably blown out of proportion. Some of the stuff gets sensationalized. But yes, some of the things that we've really focused on, we've had some very positive results in working with the legislature to make these changes that help improve. That's really the focus of our, upcoming budget request. We're looking at hopefully transitioning a couple of our special government, funded auditors to general fund. If we could do that small government review, we could stop billing small governments across the entire state for these reviews, and we can help them get compliant and get current with some of this reporting. Because as I talk to citizens, the people want to know how their government is spending their money. But we have so many examples where we've got a small district. It might be a small park board. It might be a weed board out there that they haven't submitted financial reports to us in over 10 years. They've contacted us like, hey, I want to get current. I want to get my stuff submitted. What's that going to cost? And we would give them a ballpark number. It's probably about $200-300 a year. So it's probably going to be about $2,000-3,000 to get all of these reports up to date. And they'll tell us, well, I only got $1,000 in the checking account. So we have a situation out there where people want to do the right thing, but they can't afford it. We can't do it because we need to charge for those services to be able to cover the cost of those employees. So it really we're in a catch-22. So that's where I'm hoping, working with the legislature this session, we can make some of those structural changes. The state of North Dakota, I think, as a whole, we've heard a lot about the burden and the financial impacts that local governments are facing. This is one small piece that the auditor's office can do. We can help promote fiscal transparency and accountability without the burden of paying these fees to do this work. We can get this information into the hands of the legislature, the citizens, and because they all want it. So I'm hoping we can get that done this session.
Well, speaking about a better relationship with the legislature, one thing that you wanted to ask for, and you and I had a phone conversation about this because it kind of goes, it touches on some of the reporting I've been doing in the charitable gaming space, where we're seeing a lot of interplay between, or you're seeing public entities, like for instance, I don't want to pick on them, but the city of West Fargo has West Fargo Events, which is a nonprofit which gets gaming revenue, and that nonprofit is used to book basically community events, think like concerts and things like that. It was tied up. I reported on it because it was tied up in the whole Epic Companies mess. The nonprofit was actually, West Fargo Events was actually created by Epic Companies. Up until I started reporting on them, everybody on the Secretary of State filings was Epic Companies employees, but it was portrayed to the public as being a city of West Fargo entity. One of the problems, as you described it to me, and you can expand on this or correct me if I'm wrong, is that your office, when you have some of these nonprofits, they're not really public entities, and so my understanding is your ability sometimes to go in and open up the books and to look at what's going on is limited. And so what you're asking from the legislature for is subpoena power. And to me, I think this is really important, whether it's Josh Gallion wielding this office or whoever we elect as auditor in the future. I think that this is really important because if we're gonna intermingle official entities, state, park boards or cities or whatever, with private nonprofits, we have to have an ability to get in there and take a look around. I guess that's my pitch for your bill, Josh.
I appreciate that. But yes, Rob, as we've kind of evolved, we've developed a lot more of these public-private partnerships, and that's where we're taking these public dollars. They're going into these private entities. The authority of the state auditor's office really stops at the edge of that government organization. So as these documentation of these funds, as they go into these private entities, if we do need to follow the money, there are times where we have challenges, and these private entities may not have to necessarily comply with the public records. And so we want to make sure that we have all of the tools in our tool belt to try to make sure that we've got, the best possible opportunity to have accountability and transparency on taxpayer dollars. And yes, we have several situations like this that we've run into. Last 2 sessions ago, we were asked to do an audit of the pharmacy benefits manager. And we had a contractor doing that. And really that whole project got stalled because the private entities would not provide the records that we needed. And the ones they would hand over, all of the data was scrubbed. Well, nowhere in auditing do we deal with scrubbed information. We don't let our clients remove the stuff they don't like before they give it to us. We want the source documentation. I know on our conversation, we talked a little bit about the state fair, the foundation. We have a lot of these entities where those relationships between the government entity and the private entity, they're very close. There's a lot of
the State Fair Foundation. That was my story out of Minot, where all you have again at touching on Epic Companies. I mean, it's hard to avoid Todd Burning sometimes in some of this stuff, but he was on the State Fair Foundation. He was also on the Minot Country Club board. They're both nonprofits, and they were routing money through the North Dakota State Fair Foundation and using it to basically facilitate building the country club was building a new clubhouse and a new golf course. And it ended up, because things went south, it ended up taking down the North Dakota State Fair Foundation, where they're going to dissolve. And our ability, I investigated, like I got Form 990s and the State Fair Foundation, they have to comply with open records requests, so they provided some information. But my ability really to get a whole thing, I don't have subpoena power. In some ways, Josh, I don't have any more power than I don't have anything. I can ask for things, and if they give them to me, great. But and that's kind of the problem. And I feel like that's even you, the auditor, who has an official capacity, is running into problems with this.
We do, and I want to make sure that this is a misconstrued. We're not looking at the ability to then go audit these private entities. What we're interested in is when those relationships have some of those financial transactions from the government entity to some of these private entities. When we're auditing the government entity, and some of those records and some of those finances are moving beyond the agency into these public-private partnerships, we want to make sure that we've got the ability, if they want to not provide some of those records, there are additional means that we want to be able to go to be able to obtain that information to then verify were those tax dollars being used the way that they were intended. At this point right now, we don't have that. And, asking for subpoena power is not uncommon for state auditors across the nation. I believe 37 of my other colleagues around the country have subpoena power. I had a conversation with Drew Wrigley about a year and a half ago, and this came up, and I mentioned, he asked me, "Do you have subpoena power?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "That's weird." He goes, "You should have it to make sure, because so much of what we're doing now is not just government entities. We rely on these private partnerships that are expending taxpayer dollars, and for me, as kind of the chief transparency officer for the state of North Dakota, I want to make sure that in those cases where we aren't able to obtain those records, we have to go through alternate means. Again, this is just one more tool in the toolbox that we can lean on to make sure that we've got the proper oversight.
Josh, we're wrapping things up, so I would, on behalf of Rob, encourage you to come back on, because I think at a time when the state and the country expects more transparency and accountability for our tax dollars, I think this is a really important subject for us to dive deeper into. But under that theory, do you have enough people working your office to provide the state with the transparency that they need and deserve? Do you need more FTEs? Are you having problems hiring people? How's that conversation going to go at the legislature?
At this point, I mean, really, when you look at the auditing function, the more resources you put into it, you can go broader, you can go deeper. Right now, we feel comfortable with our current workload. The private sector, when we're looking at local government audits, they are trying to rebuild those services. They're trying to come back into that sector, which is alleviating some of the pressure that's put on us. The way the state law is structured is the state auditor is responsible for all government auditing in the state of North Dakota. The local governments have the ability to go choose a private firm, and if they do that, great. But if they don't, it's on me. And so we've got vacant FTEs right now on our organizational structure. If we needed to start filling those, we can. We have some fantastic people here that help fill those positions. We have one of the most robust internship programs at state government. We've got great partnerships around the state. One of the things that we're really working on, though, is we've got to get more students into those financial fields. We've got to get more into the pipeline. We've seen a steady decline over the last 10 years. We used to produce, between public and private institutions, about 225 accounting students. I want to say that's down to around 150 today. And you think about the demands on that profession between not just government, but the private sectors, the local governments. Everybody is looking for skilled and trained financial people. But we have really spent a lot of time up front on the interns, creating opportunities. So I would say today we're good. Again, this budget process for us is really focusing on maybe transitioning some of the funding to reduce some of the burden. We want to make sure that we can retain some of those vacant FTEs in case something comes up. We're always mindful of some of these private firms that we saw during COVID. Some people just retired. Some people just shut down. And so the clients that they're serving now don't have anybody. We used to have more services out in the Dickinson area. We had some people retire out on the eastern side of the state. So we want to make sure that we're able to be responsive to that. It does take time to train, develop, and get them up to speed. But no, I think today we're in a good spot. If there are additional needs and additional requirements that the legislature would like us to look into, that may require some additional resources.
Well, Chad's right. The subpoena question deserves a deeper dive, because again, I don't want to make it sound like we're against public-private partnerships. At least I'm not. I think they can make sense at times. I think they can be innovative. But if we're going to do it, we got to make sure that there's the oversight and the transparency and the accountability. Josh, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, welcome to the second half of Plain Talk, where we are going to be talking about a polling from North Dakota United. I had a great interview with Josh Gallion, and Chad, I agree with you 100%. We got to get him on again. I think the subpoena issue is really important.
I thought it was really interesting. It seems to me that Josh is really toning down his legislative rhetoric a little bit, that he's trying to figure out how to get along with these folks.
And in fairness, there are some lawmakers that needed to tone down as well.
Absolutely, but I think that he's sort of taking the lead on that, and I think it's a good move. It's smart.
And there were some real problems. I mean, there were some people who were feeling abused. He would go on the media, like their audit just came out, and they kind of felt like all of a sudden the auditor's dragging them through the mud. And I just don't think long term, the auditor needs to have a degree of trust with these local people, and I think Josh is doing a really good job. I think he's come around on it. I think we're doing better. All right, we're switching gears. We're going to be talking about new polling that was commissioned by North Dakota United, who of course Chad works for, from DFM Research. Dean Mitchell is joining us to talk a little bit about that. Dean, how are you?
I'm doing very good, thank you.
So the polling was pretty interesting. We touched on some issues, of course, that are going to be very important in the legislative session. Property tax reform. Your poll found that 81% of respondents support property tax reform, although it's a little, I don't know what that means, because there's some people who think property tax reform is eliminating property taxes. There's others who think it's just giving local governments lots of additional money. But obviously, people want something done with property taxes, and I think the governor and the legislature has that message. 79% support universal free school lunches. I think that's a big number. That's an important number. That's going to be an interesting debate. Also, there's a debate coming around education savings accounts. And a component of that could be using those education savings accounts to pay for private school tuition. 68%, according to the survey, oppose public money being used for private school tuition. Only 10% believe a voucher program would benefit rural and urban families equally, which, by the way, I would be in that 90%, I guess. I mean, that's the problem, is there's just not a lot of school choice in rural areas. Even if you wanted to fund it, there aren't other schools other than the public school. Finally, respondents identified teacher recruitment and retention, along with insufficient funding, as two of the biggest challenges facing K-12 education in the state. The poll included 600 North Dakota voters, margin of error plus or minus 4%. Dean, let's start with property tax reform. Within that 80% number, did we have any additional numbers in terms of what sort of reform they might like?
Nothing specific on that, but what I think really interesting about that is the intensity. You look at the strongly support, it's north of 50%. So that really tells you that it's a hot button issue. Very few things get above 50% on like intensity, strongly support or strongly oppose.
Well, I think that's important. Our former governor actually just right before, or about a week, I guess, maybe before Governor Armstrong gave a State of the State address, Governor Burgum kind of said, all this hoo-ha about, I'm not quoting him directly, but basically said all this concern about property taxes was misguided, and it was just driven by the fact that, North Dakotans get their property tax statements right around campaign time. So when lawmakers are knocking on doors, they're hearing from people that just got their property tax statement. I think your poll kind of says the opposite. There is some enduring dissatisfaction here. People want something done.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been doing surveys in North Dakota since 2008. And one thing I found is that, you get that North Dakota nice, so to speak. People say somewhat oppose or somewhat support or neutral. I don't know, that kind of stuff. So when you get north of 50% who have intensity, of like they strongly support something, I think elected officials need to take notice of that.
Dean, one of the things that surprised me a little bit about the poll, and obviously, as Rob mentioned, North Dakota United commissioned it, was involved in putting together the questions. But we purposely, on the issue of school meals, did the language sort of as negatively as possible, using the word free, using the word universal, And at the end of the day, there was as much support for that as property tax reform. Did that surprise you? Because Rob and I, we agree on this, maybe coming at it from slightly different reasons why we agree on this. But this seems like one of those issues that is just moved super fast with the North Dakotans supporting it.
Yeah, I was slightly surprised by that it was so high. And you're right, we did purposely try to put as negative a tone on it, or the opposition's viewpoint of it. Universal, free. One of the easiest things in a survey is to kind of craft it the way you want to get the answers you want. And in this particular one, I don't think we did that. We were like really trying to knock it down, and we still got, once again, strong intensity. It was 55% strongly support universal free school meals. So that was kind of a surprise. And it's also kind of a surprise is that when you pit the two against each other, which we do later on, it's basically 50-50 between property tax reform and universal free meals.
Dean, did you survey, or I guess, are you aware of other survey results? Because part of me wondering, to Chad's surprise about how high support was, I was wondering if some of that was maybe driven by the fact that during the pandemic, we had it. People had their school lunches paid for. There's a lot of people who are probably remembering, I didn't have to pay for school lunches during that time. That was really nice. I support this. So do we have any, I'm wondering if the public sentiment was still being driven by that, or if maybe we had an intermediary poll where it's been even later that support has risen.
We've done it in the past where we've asked it, not specifically, but we've asked this concept over the years. And I believe this is the highest support level that we have seen. So it's like be along the lines of what you said.
You think the pandemic, when it was paid for, you think that's maybe driving some of this?
It could have been that, yes. And then also, perhaps a little bit, the issue became an issue at the presidential race level, stuff that's over here in Minnesota. You look at folks in the eastern North Dakota, which kind of get some of the Minnesota news, so to speak. And, kids in Moorhead receive, free school meals. And so maybe that has something to do with it. But without doing a focus group and getting right into the nitty gritty, kind of hard exactly to say why. But the numbers have gone up.
So, Dean, Rob brought up the education savings account concept. And so this poll didn't include sort of the whole sort of all the parts together question. It was sort of broken out to two different parts. It was public dollars to private schools, which people did not support. But then the concept of parents getting money to pay for things like counselors and those kind of things was popular. Do you have any sense? The thing that I'm struggling with a little bit is when you put all that together, does the poison pill of the private school tuition outweigh the stuff that people like, or vice versa, right? Does wrapping private school tuition in bacon make it more palatable for people, or is that a poison pill? Do you have any sense of that? Because I don't at this point.
I don't either, to be quite honest with you. It's you kind of read the results, get what you kind of, out of it. One of the most important questions in a survey is the one you don't ask afterwards when you look at the results. So that would have been a really good question to ask. But you see, when you just talk about public monies for private schools, the opposition to that is dramatic. And then when you tie in the other, more of a public school, services and stuff, the number goes up a little bit higher. I'm going to have to punt on that one a little bit. I think that's something, a public policy issue that kind of has to be wrangled with, and probably another good question in a survey to figure that out.
I think what drives some of that high number is somebody who's probably more open to the idea of funding or making available funds for people to choose private school and pay for tuition. I think three things are driving it. I think one is the fact that a lot of North Dakota is very rural, and they just don't see a benefit for them. So they're going to be in that 68% money saying, I couldn't pay for my kids to go to a private school if I want to, because there's not a private school that's nearby that I could send them to. I think the other thing is people equate private school with rich people. So we just feel like, we're just subsidizing rich people. And then also, I think there's some concern. This is probably the smallest of the three factors. I think there's some concern about funding just about all of in fact, I don't know of a private school in North Dakota that's not religiously affiliated.
There is one in Bismarck now, the Innovation School.
Okay, so there is one. But most of them that people are familiar with are religious, and I think they don't want to be subsidizing religion. I think that those are the three things for the people who want to do this. I think that is the public sentiment that they're going to have to overcome to get this done.
Yeah, I would just, one of the things that in this survey, when you do a surveys, we talked them over the years, you kind of have an idea of where the public is going to be on a lot of issues. They don't really kind of shock you. But we added that question in there about who receives benefits on private schools, whether it was rural or city. And you mentioned that 10% believe that rural families, same as city families. So I think that you kind of answer Chad's question about the poison pill and stuff like that. I see it the same way for public schools. If it had an education savings account about using benefits, because if you live in Bowman, you're not going to be able to use, or most likely not be able to use some of that money to drive to Dickinson or drive to Bismarck to do those services. It'll just eat up all your money, however much that they give away. So I think you see in this survey that North Dakotans see that extra money that goes in that could be for good services are going to benefit city families. And so that's a policy issue that I think people are going to have to fight through and figure out what makes sense for North Dakota.
At least for the tuition component of it. There are other parts of the and this is the part that I guess it's kind of a question mark, but the other things like, if you can use it to get a tutor, if you can use it to access online educational tools, there's some things like that if we can make some funds available for that, rural people are going to benefit from that too. But the bugaboo is going to be tuition, and that rural, I always hesitate to use urban in a North Dakota setting because we really don't have urban anywhere in our state. But that rural versus city divide on tuition is going to be tough for them to overcome.
But I think it's beyond tuition to a certain extent as well, Rob, when you start talking about like behavioral health services and some of those things that you're not going to have in rural areas that you would. So it's just, what is included in the savings account? What can you use it on? And what can you not use it on? And are those services available in all communities?
Jen,
and that's gonna.
Have we seen the ESA bill drop yet?
We have not. I mean, that's the other problem, right? We don't know what's in. And to what Governor Armstrong said the other day, there's going to be more than one. I think there's going to be three. The last I heard, there's going to be three. So one other thing, that Rob also references, the biggest issue facing K through 12 education. Obviously, this poll was very focused on K through 12. There was four things that all tied at the beginning: insufficient funding, students inadequately prepared for graduation, teacher retention, recruitment, and student behavior in classroom, which is something that we historically have not included in polling. Mm-hmm. We tweeted it for the first time here, and it ended up being tied for the first. One of the things in the crosstabs that I found interesting is in the partisan crosstabs, it all made sense, right? Republicans were mostly concerned about being ready for graduation and behaviors. Democrats, funding and teacher recruitment, right? I mean, it's like stereotypical sort of responses to these things. But I was a little surprised, Dean, and I'd be interested in those four were all tied. Yeah. But all at 20%. There wasn't just one issue that everybody's like, this is the issue that matters to schools. I'm always surprised when there's not like one thing that people are coalescing around.
Yeah, that was all four of those within the margin of error of each other at 20%. I think I don't have past surveys in front of me, but there was always one or two things that kind of popped out, right? This time it's all four. And you make a really good point, Chad, about anybody that's looking at surveys. The real data is inside the crosstabs. And you mentioned, you got the ideological differences and the age differences. So when it comes to education and it comes to property tax, party affiliation or self-identification of party affiliation and age are the two big movers. It's not where you live necessarily. It's not so much whether you have a college degree or don't have a college degree. It's, what color hat do you wear, so to speak, and how old you are is how you see the differences of these issues. But overall, all four of them are tied.
And the how old you are, I assume that's directly connected. Do you have kids in schools or not?
Yes. Yeah. And we did ask that question. We didn't run the crosstab on that specifically, but we do have questions, if your kid is in a public school, if your kid's in a private school, which off the hand, the ones that we didn't have a big sample of people that had kids in the private school, but they think very much like those that have kids in public schools too, which that was kind of shocking to me. It wasn't like dramatically higher or lower between those two.
Well, it's certainly interesting. A survey. It's going to inform a lot of the debate happening in Bismarck. Dean, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
All right. Well, we're going to end up, Chad, 2 great interviews. It's hard to know what to say about the ESA debate until we know what's in the bill. I mean, we're going to be debating tuition. There's no question about that. I'm really interested in the other parts of it. And in some ways, I'm more excited about the other parts of it than tuition. And maybe that's just because I'm not that interested in private. We have a great local public school. I have no reason really to consider, even if we had, we're not a religious family, so religious schools don't hold a ton of appeal to us in that sense. And academically, our public school is doing great for us. So we really don't have, and so maybe that's why I understand why it's important for some people, and I'm generally supportive of it. I really think though that I want them to be focused on what are some other creative things we could be doing with these ESAs that could benefit North Dakotans across the state.
The politics of this. First of all, I think you and I both agree that looking at polling is always fascinating because there's always things that sort of surprise you and don't surprise you. And like Dean made the point that every time I look at poll results, I think, damn it, I wish we would have asked this or something like that. But I think the ESA, it's a fascinating, just like if I remove myself from being very passionate and like my job being part of this, it's a fascinating political sort of conversation. Because what do you include and what do you not include is very important, but there are people who only care about the tuition piece. So they're trying to load this up with as much good stuff to make it palatable. And then those of us who hate that side of it, they're figuring out how much good stuff makes the private school stuff palatable. It's the give and take that's so interesting.
And that's democracy. It's how much, really, it's how big of a crap sandwich are you willing to eat to get what you want? Yeah.
Again, is that date covered in bacon? I don't like dates, but man, I love bacon.
Right. So I guess that's the question. I think the smart thing to do here would be to find the parts of the ESA that you can build majority consensus around and pass those. And then once we have the ESAs in place, down the road, we can talk about what should we add, what should we subtract. I think the ESA is a great concept. And obviously it's going to matter, what do we include, what do we not include? I want the concept to become law. And then I want us to have a very good debate about, as we go forward, what's in it, what's not.
But part of the conversation about the concept is how do you make sure all parents understand how to utilize it? I mean, I still worry about those parents who have language issues, maybe are a little bit lower economic. What's the job of the schools to make sure all parents understand how to utilize these programs with the legislature, DPI or whatever, to make sure, hey, little Johnny needs some behavioral health services. Here's a place where you can get money, and making sure they know that's there.
But that's something we can address once it's created. I mean, and the thing is, we probably had that problem with Social Security, where at first there were a lot of people that didn't understand it, or Medicare. I mean, even now.
We literally just had the problem with the primary tax credit and people applying for the $500, right? But we just can't ignore that.
No, but it also can't be the barrier. Once it becomes part of our lives and people get used to it, adoption and all that stuff can improve over time. I thought the interview with Josh Gallion was very, very good. That's an interesting issue as well. And I am really glad. The auditor is it's sort of an overlooked office, but it is hugely important. I cannot tell you how much of the reporting that I do relies often on information that's uncovered by audits. It's a hugely important job. I think Josh Gallion has turned things around. There's probably still some things he could work on. I'll be honest. Touting yourself as Donald Trump's favorite auditor is not great for me. But whatever.
But it's like so many of these guys, Rob. I mean, that sort of stuff. There's so many legislators are the same way. It's like they do that kind of stuff, but then when you actually talk to them about what they're doing in office and what they care about, it doesn't match up with that sort of flamboyant political garbage that I think makes both of us.
Trump just needs to do a better job of leaving some of the flamboyant stuff out of his day job. And it seems I have noticed tonally, I think over the last year that's improved. Clearly some things internally have improved. That was a good interview, and I'm looking forward to get him on because I think the subpoena issue is really important.
I was exceptionally impressed with how he handled that interview. And I mean, he could have dunked on the legislature.
He could have.
He totally could have dunked on the legislature, and he did not.
So we first week of the legislature in the books. This afternoon they're going to be having their first real floor sessions. So because they haven't, I mean, really, it makes sense for them not to have floor sessions, but also they only have 80 days to gavel in. None of the days where they're just in committee work, those don't count towards that 80-day limit. But
the state of the state they did though, right?
The state of the state, because they had to gavel in for that. So that was day one. So today will be day two when they gavel in.
This space we should be done in August.
Yeah. Well, and in fairness, I don't know what you do in a floor session if you haven't kicked any bills out of committee yet.
Exactly.
The committee's got to do their work. What do you think so far? Anything developing in your mind?
It feels to me like deja vu all over again to last session. Rather than talking about eliminating income taxes, we're talking about property taxes. But other than that, it feels like a lot of the same stuff is sort of trickling up. I mean, the social the social issues in the stuff around, there's a resolution that was put in to send a message to the Supreme Court that they should overturn same-sex marriage. I've got news for Representative Fight. Nobody at the Supreme Court cares. But then there's also transgender bathroom. There's the 10 Commandments. I don't understand the idea of conservatives paying money to print 10 Commandments posters to put them in classrooms. In that expense plus the legal expense, it's just dumb.
Well, as a limited government conservative, I don't know why we're going to spend money to essentially endorse a religion when we live in a pluralistic society where we have Hindu people and Muslim people and atheist people and everybody else across the Jewish people across the spectrum who I wrote in the column. I thought this was a pretty good turn of phrase. One of the most surreal experiences in my professional life has watched the Bible thumpers insist on the perdition that awaits us if children are not educated in the presence of a 10 Commandments poster, while simultaneously aligning themselves politically with serial adulterer Donald Trump. These things do not compute to me. But even just from a First Amendment perspective, and by the way, in Article 1 of the North Dakota Constitution perspective, the North Dakota Constitution says we're not supposed to give preference to any religion.
And what happens, Rob, when there's a Muslim private school that gets set up that's getting public dollars through tuition, through an ESA? Is the legislature going to make them put up the 10 Commandments in their schools as well? I mean, what is this?
In fairness, I don't think Hoverson's bill, it only applies to public. It doesn't apply to private schools now. As I read it. It does apply to the college campuses, though, in the North Dakota University system.
Every college campus.
Which is something. The academics are going to love that. By the way, I don't think that bill's going to pass.
You know what? But Senator Don Shibley's on that bill. Senator Don Shibley is a normal, traditional Republican. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
I'd like to hear him explain that because, yeah, he is. He's a good lawmaker. He's a smart guy.
He's a great lawmaker.
But there's, some of that. And to me, it's just an American thing. You can be as religious as you want to be. That's great. That's your right as an American. But in our public spaces, it's pluralistic. And by the way, if you open the door to hanging the 10 Commandments, then I hope you're ready for a Satanist display and a Muslim display and everything else. Because once you open that door, you have to treat everybody equally. I'd rather just keep that stuff out of the classroom. We're only going to bring it in an academic sense when they're studying stuff like that and just leave the rest of it. But you're right. More culture war bills. And by the way, Tvite's bill, where it's it's the bathroom bill. We passed a bathroom bill last session. It's the law. I don't understand what are we doing again? I mean, we're just, I mean, at some point it's like, we already did this. What are you doing now? Is it just about really, really making trans people feel unwelcome in our state? Is that your motivation? Because it kind of feels that way.
And at what point is the North Dakota legislature just checking everybody's genitals on the way into every bathroom in the state? I mean, how far does this go?
I think long term, when we're building new buildings, we need to look at building bathrooms that are easier to comply with. And frankly, just me using it. I wouldn't mind more private stalls. I wouldn't mind more private bathrooms if we can accommodate that.
Let's just choose big government toilets for Rob Port. No efficiencies. Just one.
There's a way we can do it and still be efficient. They do it in Europe where you go in and like every like little bathroom stall is its own room.
Oh, Rob Port following the European model on how to fund government. Oh my, you wearing your Metallica shirt and just like, I mean.
You like my Metallica shirt?
So awesome.
It is
awesome.
Okay, so we're gonna actually end the show. We got some listener feedback, and
which is awesome, by the way. More listener feedback.
Please call us. He does text. We love getting your feedback, but we're gonna play that right now for you, and we'll respond.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown. I've really been enjoying the podcast since a friend recommended it last fall when I wanted to learn more about things besides the presidential election. We hear in the intro, he's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum. And I'm just wondering if there is a center anymore, across the country, but specifically in North Dakota. I recently read that, center or moderate throughout a lot of the world would line up with a moderate Democrat in the United States. And I'm wondering if you think that's true. And then related to that, since I don't align with a particular party, I don't really feel comfortable with either party, so I feel like I probably am in the center somewhere. What can I do in North Dakota? Because it's obviously a Republican supermajority. I don't necessarily want to run for office, but I do want to be informed. And aside from contacting my state legislators, which I do, what else should I be doing, or how can I get involved? Thank you.
Well, that was two-part question. So I think the first is there a political center? And my response would be yes. But the problem is everybody thinks they're in the center.
Right.
The center is kind of where everybody, there is not the most, what you or I might consider the most right-wing or left-wing person. They all believe that there's lots of people that secretly agree with them or that they're representing the masses. Just about everybody believes that. So the center for most people is where they're standing.
Yeah. And I would also say, we say in the intro, he's right of center, he's left of center. That's true. By any definition of where the center is, you're right of me, I'm left of you, I suppose. But I do want to call out the fact we don't say he's a Democrat or he's a Republican, I'm a Democrat either, because I think we really want on this show to be talking about issues, not from the little D or the little R. We talk too much about issues. The Democrats are for this, the Republicans are against this. So, I think, I wish we wouldn't have partisanship in the same way, because I do think it negatively affects our elections at times. But yeah, I mean, where is the center? It's all in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
And in terms of what that means nationally, I barely what the center is in America, let alone around the world.
I have started thinking of center being in the center less ideologically and more sort of procedurally, in that I think that centrists right now are people who believe in regular order, are people who believe in our institutions and aren't willing are willing to accept, for instance, when you lose an election and then you accept. The other day I mentioned John Fetterman's name as a potential centrist. Now, I don't think John Fetterman ideologically is a centrist. I think that Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania is very much a progressive. What made me think he was a centrist, though, were comments that he made recently about, hey, I'm going to vote for some of Donald Trump's cabinet appointees, because he said that's democracy and that's how it works. And that made me think of him as a centrist, because that's the process. So maybe being a centrist right now is accepting if the other side wins the election, they get to govern. And your job is certainly to advocate for your point of view and advocate for your constituents if you're in elected office. But it's also to accept that they get to govern. And your job's not to just obstruct them and frustrate them at every step of the way.
Well, and I think Senator Heitkamp the other day, when I said, "Where have all the moderates gone?" she sort of pushed back and she said, "Well, it's not necessarily moderates that are compromising. It's people like Jim Langford. It's people on the left and the right who are willing to work together and sit down and get things done."
Yeah, Senator Langford from Oklahoma, who's not a centrist, as she pointed out.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
Not at all. And so I think her point was a good one. And so maybe those people are in the center because they're willing to talk to the other side, accept results of elections, accepting you don't get everything you want. Um, so maybe the center is much big. Well, it used to be much bigger because I think most U.S. senators used to feel that way. I think now, and it sort of goes back to that conversation with Heidi, where you score points and you win victories based on Twitter hits rather than on actually getting legislation done.
her other question was, how do I get involved? What do I do? And she said she didn't necessarily want to run for elected office. I would say if you were considering elected office, I would say start local. Find a park board, find a county commission, something like that, and serve there. And start there because that's really where the rubber hits the road. It's where you can get governing experience, and then maybe you move up the ladder. But if you're not thinking about elected office, you're just a citizen, my advice would be go to the source. Don't trust a lot of what you're seeing on social media or you're listening to on talk radio or maybe even this show. Go to the source. One of the wonderful things about is so many of local meetings now are live streamed. So many, certainly everything at the legislature is live streamed. You can watch committee hearings, you can watch floor sessions. Our elected officials are very, very accessible. So if you have a question or if somebody does something that you're just scratching your head, like, I don't understand that, send them an email, give them a phone call, talk to them. So that would be my argument is if go to the source because it's available and it's there. And I realize when you're first getting started, it can be confusing and hard to wrap your head around. But go to the source and get your information there.
And I would want to double down on those nonpartisan offices and those nonpartisan political subs, because I think when you think about what's happening at the school board level, what you think about what's happening at the city or the county or even the township, depending on how rural you are, that's where things really get done. I mean, that's where it's, making sure the roads get paved, as my friend Rob is fond of saying. But I think also figure out where your passions are and get involved in groups that are working on legislation or standing up for community issues or those kinds of things. If it's human rights, there's tons of groups. If it's education, there's tons of League of Women Voters. I mean, there's also, I'm mostly mentioning groups on the left, but there's groups on the right as well.
Americans for Prosperity.
Yeah, but make sure you're working. Like a lot of those groups end up being super partisan. So also, be careful about that. I mean, the problem is you're not going to agree with everything North Dakota United does. You're not going to agree with everything AFP does, but also just dive into issues you're passionate about. Because I just watched a hearing yesterday on insulin, and it was a mom and her daughter who had been fighting for 5 years on insulin because it's something they cared about, obviously affected them directly. That's not somebody who's running for office. That's not somebody who, has big money connections or whatever. That's just a mom who cared about her kid.
Yeah.
And so I think those opportunities are here.
Make a trip down to Bismarck. I mean, you walk up and down the Great Hall, you will bump into the majority leaders. You will bump into the governor. North Dakota's system process is so fantastically open. Which is why sometimes I get upset at people who abuse that and come up and they abuse the lawmakers. They shout at them. And that would be my other advice too, is if you get involved, I understand it could be so frustrating and you get mad at them. But try to come to it from a place of understanding, and also remember you can only make peace with your enemies. That's the way the process works. If you have to build a coalition around something, you have to build a consensus around something to get it passed. The only people that you can win over are the people who disagree with you now. So if you make enemies out of them, you're not going to go anywhere.
And just a reminder, politics makes strange bedfellows. Your enemy today will be your best friend tomorrow. And so I think Rob's point there about treating people with respect is really, really important. I get reminded periodically when I interview legislators, and I'm not very nice, that they don't like me as much afterwards when I try to talk to them about issues. So I got to be nice, Rob.
Yeah, well, that's nice and fair. That's the way to do it. Ashley, James from Jamestown, thank you so much for leaving the voicemail. Anyone else who wants to leave us a voicemail or you can text, save this number in your phone. You can send us text. The phone number is 701-587-3141. We're going to put a
Bob, can I have one more bit of advice for Ashley?
yes.
Absolutely get involved, Ashley. The state, your community, everybody needs you to be involved and care about these things. We get into trouble when people stop caring about things. You don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican to care about your community.
Yeah, just show up. And there's got to be ways. Park board, PTA, somewhere. There's somewhere to get involved, and it all matters. Okay, we're going to put a pin in it there. We thank you so much for listening. As always, this legislative session is going to continue to unfold. We're going to have a lot of fun covering it. Plain Talk is your place to come for great news and analysis for that. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
I don't like dates, but man, I love bacon.
Right.